Hi, Agnes.
Hi.
Now, you're like me. You didn't grow up in Kamloops. You're from away. So I was wondering if you could tell us, how did you end up coming to this fair city, and how did you end up at St. Andrews?
Those are both very interesting questions. Because I was born in Glasgow, Scotland, and I came to Saskatchewan to teach school. And I was teaching first grade class in a small town in Saskatchewan. And I married a grain farmer, and we had a son called Alan. And I lived on the farm quite happily for 30 years. But my husband, his health was really not very good.
Okay.
And he died when he was only 62.
Oh, that's pretty young, eh?
And by that time, our son was had left home and was living and working in Kamloops. And he had married a girl called Chris, who was a Kamloops girl, and they were buying a house.
Okay.
So since I obviously couldn't run the farm, it made sense for me to move to Kamloops.
There was going to be a move either way.
Yes, it was going to be a move someplace. So Kamloops it was. But I'm here with no husband and no job and absolutely no friends. And I thought, well, I need a plan. So I started trying to figure out what I should do. And one of the first things I did was I joined a group at one of the other seniors' residence kind of places. They've played a card game called 500 on Monday nights. And I knew how to play that game.
Okay.
So I thought, that's good. I can get to know.
Quick fit,
Get to know some people. And then at the same time, I was looking for a church because churches are very important to me. God is very important in my life. So I decided to church shop.
Okay.
And I was living in the North Shore. So I went to a few different churches in the North Shore and didn't really feel that I cared to go back to them.
They will remain nameless.
Yes. So I thought, well, I'll maybe try the Presbyterian church, even though it's way on the other side of the city, but it's very much like the Church of Scotland. So the first Sunday that I come, there are two greeters at the door, and they shake my hand, and they realize that I'm new, and they say they're glad to see me, and that they hope I'll enjoy the service. So I came into the church, and I came down the aisle and took an aisle seat, roughly about the middle of the church. And in those days, the choir all sat up here as a group facing the congregation. So at the end of the service, there was a lady from here, and she came out and she started rushing down the aisle, heading straight for me and looking at me, and she said, have you been playing cards at, I have forgotten the name of the senior's place. But anyway, she asked me if I had been playing cards there on a Monday, and I said, yes. And she said, I never played with you, but she said, I was sure that that's where I recognized you from. And she told me that her name was Joyce Armstrong.
Beloved woman from this congregation.
Right. And her husband was the person who was sitting directly in front of where I had sat. So they invited me to go downstairs for coffee, which I did, and Joyce was talking to me as we were going downstairs. And then after we picked up our coffee, she started introducing me to people, telling them my name, and that I was brand new in Kamloops, and I came from Saskatchewan. Well, there's an awful lot of people like you and I who...
We used to say, last one out, turn off the lights.
Yes. So, because Joyce mentioned Saskatchewan, everybody around about, a lot of people around about me had things they wanted to tell me or ask me about Saskatchewan. So I had lots of little conversations. And when I'm driving home, when I was being driven home, I was thinking that I should go back there again. So the next week I did, and then the third week I went back again, and by this time I was beginning to recognize faces, and I could even put some names to those faces. And people were saying good morning to me and smiling at me when I came in. I sat down downstairs with my coffee, and the minister came over and sat beside me. And I started to tell him how much I was appreciating his sermons, because the first week he had been talking about making major changes in lifestyles. And I thought, yep, that's me. And the second week, he had been talking about losing people that you love or care about from your life.
It's like he'd been reading your mail or something.
And that's what I said. I said to him, you must have known I was coming because you could have written those 2 sermons for me. And his reply to that was, well, I guess this is where God wants you to be. 20 years later, Steve,
Oh, wow.
I'm still here.
Yeah. Now, not too long ago, you had a medical emergency.
Sure did.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, Agnes?
Yes, in December of 2018, I had a stroke. And my son and daughter-in-law were up in Prince George for Christmas with their daughter and family, and I hadn't gone with them. So on the 28th of December, I'm home alone. And Marlene, who has become a really good friend of mine over the years, was thinking that she should be phoning and talking to me. But she didn't do it right away. And after a while, because it kept on coming back into her head, she decided she would phone me.
Yep.
So when we started talking, she said, "Are you all right, Agnes? You're slurring your words." And I said, "Slurring my words? No, I'm not."
She knew you weren't a drinker.
Yes, and she knew I wasn't a drinker. In fact, she said that. She said, "If I didn't know that you didn't drink, I would be thinking you had been having a little tipple." But she said, "You need to see a doctor." And she said, "I can't take you because I'm not supposed to drive after it's dark." But she said, "I want you to call an ambulance and go to the hospital." And I said, "There's nothing wrong with me. I don't need to go to the hospital." And she said, "Well, I'm worried about you." And she said, "I want you to go. Please call an ambulance." And I said, "Well, I'll think about it." But I called my son. And I thought he was going to come through the phone at me because he said, "Yes, there is something wrong, Mum, and you do need to see a doctor. And don't look for somebody to drive you there. Call an ambulance and do it now." So I decided, well, outnumbered 2-1, so I did it. And on the way up to the hospital, I was telling the paramedic that I really didn't know why I was doing this, because there was nothing wrong with me, and there was surely other people who needed this ambulance more than me. Well, she didn't say anything. She just smiled. She didn't say anything.
As far as you were concerned, though,
Right.
like, you were clear, there's nothing wrong with you. You were just following up on the wishes of your
Yeah, I was doing as I was told, but I really didn't believe them. So when we got to the hospital, we got to the door, and there was somebody right there at the door meeting me with a wheelchair. And he was not taking me to an office or to fill in forms or anything. He wasn't taking me to the waiting room. He was taking me for a scan.
They were all ready for you.
And I thought, well, I don't really feel quite the same. Maybe I do need to see a doctor. But I still wasn't convinced.
Okay, yeah, no, interesting.
But when the doctor saw a blood clot in my brain, he gave me that, whatever that medication is, that blasts the whole clot away. And I really don't remember getting the medication. And I have no idea how I came to wake up in a bed in the emergency ward with the curtain open. But I did. And the nurse, as soon as she saw that I was awake, came over to ask me if I was feeling better now. And I discovered that I couldn't speak.
Oh, that must have been scary.
It was awful. I was absolutely horrified. I'm a talker. I couldn't visualize a life without being able to talk. And I was starting to panic. And she was trying to calm me down and telling me that I had had medication, but in a little while I would be able to talk again. So not to worry about it. So I came down one notch. And they kept on checking on me very regularly. Everybody who passed the thing would ask me a question that was a yes or no question.
Okay, yeah.
And eventually I discovered that I could find this yes and no word in my head. I hadn't known how to answer her before. But I found the word right, yes and no, and then I found that I could use them so I didn't have to just nod my
Brain
head.
was like slowly recovering, reprogramming itself.
Yes, just a little bit. And so they kept an eye on me for the rest of the night. I really don't know anything about times, how long anything was. But quite early in the morning, I was sent for another scan. And when I came back from that scan, my language had really improved. I had a lot more words that I could say, I could think them, and I could speak them. And when I got to the stage that I could form a sentence and said, I need to go to the bathroom, they took me to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And then just a little while later, they took me upstairs to a regular ward. And that's where I was when my son and daughter-in-law arrived from Prince George just a little bit later in the day. And when they were trying to talk to me, I couldn't carry on a conversation. But I could make myself understood, and I could kind of answer things that they were asking me.
A little bit of charades.
Yeah, hand gestures and whatever. And then somebody from the heart department of the hospital, I don't know whether it was a specialist or who it was, but she came to tell me that I had had a stroke, and that stroke had been caused by blood, a little bit of blood leaking from my mitral valve. And meeting up with an episode of atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation. That's a hard one.
Yeah.
But the two had come together at a very bad time, which had caused all of this. And the doctors had decided that they were going to surgery, major heart surgery, for an 80-year-old was not a good option. So they were going to treat me with warfarin and blood pressure pills. But those doses have to be exactly right.
Precise.
Very, very precise. And down to the point somethings. And they were going to keep me until they got those doses right on. So it was January the 3rd before I was discharged from the hospital. And I had been in the hospital for 6 days.
Wow. Wow.
But I wasn't better. You know,
There was a road of recovery
yes,
still waiting you.
There was recovery.
And how did that go? Because from what are you describing to where you are now, it's incredible.
No, what she was telling me then was that they would try and find me a speech therapist and a home help for a few days.
Oh, for a few days.
Yeah, well, for a few weeks maybe.
Okay.
Maybe for a few weeks.
Yeah.
But it turned out that due to a completely different set of circumstances, Chris could come and live with me for a few weeks.
Oh, wow. Wonderful.
And she could look after me, she
Yeah.
could look after the house, she could shop for groceries, she could cook the meals, she could drive to wherever I needed to go. And I had to go to the Life Lab every 3 or 4 days to make sure that the warfarin was still stable. And then the next day, I had to go to my doctor to get the results and to find out if there was going to be any change in it.
So it was just perfect timing that
Just-
she could be there to help you.
Yes, she was there. And after a few weeks, Dr. Pretorius said to me that he was absolutely amazed at how quickly my health was recovering.
Well, everything had seemed to line up. I mean, when you got off the ambulance, they were right there waiting for you to take you in to get a scan, and then your daughter-in-law is there to care for you, and that all happened because your friend checked in on you. Agnes, how do you make sense of this all? Do you see God's hand in your life?
Yes, because God has always been in my life. I grew up in a family where God was very important. In fact, he was almost like another person in the family who was in a different room and you couldn't see him, but you could talk to him.
Okay, yeah.
And I had talked to God. I was during the war. I was born in 1938,
Yeah, okay.
and during all the war years, I was just a little kid, and I had really nobody to play with or do things with, and I talked to God.
No kidding, no kidding.
So I could see that God was still in my life.
You were telling me that your friend, who,
Marlene.
Yeah, who had felt that nagging sense. What's her take on this story?
She, when I talked to her about what you were wanting, this plan that you were wanting to do with biographies, and she said, well, it was definitely a spiritual experience, and she said it was a spiritual experience for me too.
Wow.
And she said, I've told lots of people about how how much I had been forced to phone you
No kidding.
that night.
Well, Agnes, it seems to me that God isn't finished with you yet.
I hope he's got good things coming. No more strokes.
Thanks for sharing your story with us.
You're welcome.